Hi, I'm Steffany Strange. Want to hear something scary?
One night, Regina slept over at her cousin Tiff's while her aunt and uncle were on an overnight work trip. The girls made a blanket fort in Tiff's living room and stayed up late to tell each other spooky stories. Tiff's family had only recently moved into the house, but she was anxious to tell her cousin a story about her new home. Apparently, 10 years ago, the first owners of this house claimed their young daughter Ella had gone missing, began Tiff. They were in the living room, watching TV, when they heard their daughter's screams from the bathroom. There was scratching and whimpering coming from behind the door. The father shouted Ella's name, but there was no response. When the dad managed to kick down the bathroom door, they nearly fainted at what they saw. The floor and walls were covered in blood. Scratches covered the shower curtain, and in the bathtub, the water was stained with blood. But Ella was gone. The room was empty, door locked. But the window, the light of the full moon shone through the window that something had crashed through from the outside. The lack of evidence led the police around in circles, but the girl was never found. Sometime later, a neighbor went out to feed their dog and found another dog hogging the bowl. But it was a weird dog, hairless all over, long black hair on its head. It looked like a human girl, but it had a snout and jaw like a dog. Snarling, it turned and ran off on all fours. Other neighbors saw the dog girl too, and even recorded footage that made it onto the news. The police made a DNA match on a piece of hair it left behind. The dog girl was Ella. It turns out that after she'd somehow been transformed into this wild thing, she tried to go back home, but her parents couldn't handle her and tried to abandon her in the wild. When they were caught neglecting her, the dad committed suicide, and the mom was locked away for abandoning their child. What happened to Ella? Regina asked. They didn't know what to do with her either. She was half child, half dog, Tiff continued. They say she was taken into a lab or sanctuary, but before they could figure out what to do, she got loose. And people still see her wandering the streets to this day. A sudden growl and barking surrounded the tent, and Regina jumped out and onto the couch to see a video of a barking dog on the living room TV. Tiff rolled on the ground with laughter. Regina stormed out of the room and huffed that she was going to go brush her teeth. As Tiff was catching her breath, she suddenly heard scratching and tapping on the tile in the front hall. Regina, I thought you went to the bathroom. Tiff peered into the darkened hallway and saw a figure in the dark, sniffing around on all fours like a dog. The scratching intensified. Hey, Regina, sorry about the joke, but can you stop that? At the sound of her voice, Tiff watched as the figure froze, focused on her, and started to growl low in its throat, then began approaching her on its hands and feet. Regina, Tiff whimpered, feeling the cold draft blow in through the now open front door. As the shape stalked closer, Tiff realized it wasn't Regina at all. Out of the dark emerged a large, pale snout with snarling fangs and a head of long, tangled black hair. Its human-like eyes locked with Tiff's as the beast's shuddering jaw growled and dripped foam, steam panting off its breath. Its claws tapped and scratched on the tile. The claws were attached to limbs resembling human hands and feet. It agilely crept closer. Ella? Regina would never forget the unearthly snarling, tearing, and screaming she heard from the hall as she came out of the bathroom, hands still wet from the sink. She had no way to explain to Tiff's parents or authorities the trail of blood and evidence of struggle that had been dragged through the front door. When Tiff's mangled remains were found, her death had been ruled as an animal attack. But deep down, Regina knew Ella had come home.
We're a really tight-knit family. It's myself, my little sister Tess,
our mom and our grandma. Our house is filled with so much love from both our mom and grandma, who are also regular churchgoers. Don't get me wrong though, Tess and I had to go back in the day, but now that I'm older, I can stay home and take care of both of us. We get to decide if we want to go or not, which is nice because I'm not always up for it. And one day, I got to be home alone with Tess and learned about her past lives. But a lot of it just seemed like stuff she had seen on TV, or maybe she had learned it at school. For example, she had stories like riding in a wagon drawn by horses while wearing a yellow dress, walking through the streets of Victorian London, sitting in front of a small black and white TV as she watched the incredible moon landing unfold before her eyes. All these things were impressively descriptive, and yet not impossible for a first grader to know about. And while I might have been somewhat open-minded, we did not tell my mom and Gran in case they didn't approve or didn't believe her. But things started seeping into her daily life, like referring to something in a really old-fashioned way. She asked to use the loo at school. She tried to make a cup of tea with milk, which might be fine and all, except these are expressions that are commonly associated with British culture, which we are not. Sometimes she said weird stuff and my mom told her off. But when she began sleep talking in Dutch, they took a notice, especially when Gran told us we had Dutch heritage. Tess looked right at Mom and Gran and told them straight up she died many times before, and in one of her past lives, she lived in Holland with our ancestors. Now, this was all rather entertaining, strange, and yet innocent until that day, Friday the 13th. Tess had been studying superstitions at school, and when she got home, she couldn't wait to ask us about black cats and knocking on wood. We were all sitting at the kitchen table enjoying a meal of spaghetti. Tess was also eating all the garlic bread and not sharing, so Mom told her to pass it around and offer some to Gran. Gran shook her head and smiled, joking that maybe her inability to eat garlic wasn't because of indigestion, but because she might be a vampire. Mom laughed and asked Tess if she had learned about that superstition too. We were expecting Tess to laugh along, but instead, she had a very weird, serious look on her face. "No, Granny, you can't eat garlic because it reminds you of when I was in your tummy." I burst out laughing at the odd statement, but Mom and Gran were shocked. What do you mean, Tess?" asked Mom. "You were never in Gran's tummy. You were in mine because I'm your mommy." Tess looked at Mom like she was dense. Gran stayed silent. "I know that, Mommy, but before I was in your tummy, I was in Gran's tummy. But I was going to be a boy, so I choked and died. Then Gran nearly died too, so I had to wait quite a while before I could go into your tummy." Gran let out a sob as Mom's eyes grew wide with fear. Later, Mom told me something that only a handful of people knew. About 25 years ago, Gran had fallen pregnant. It had been a miracle since after Mom had been born, Gran and Grandpa had not been able to conceive again. But in a tragic turn of events, around 8 months into the pregnancy, the baby had died. The umbilical cord had wrapped around its neck, and the baby had choked in the womb. The surgery after had complications, and Gran had flatlined for a few minutes. It had all been very traumatic and had never really been spoken of since. And Gran had never told anyone that the baby had been a boy, not even my mom. There was no way Tess could have known about this, and it seems completely impossible that a 6-year-old would make it up. And the even weirder thing, the due date of that baby, 15 years before, had been Friday the 13th.
Gabriel didn't like having to leave his heavily pregnant wife and son when he traveled for work to Manila. But not only did he have to pay the bills, but he had to pay off the huge gambling debt he'd accumulated over the years. His family knew nothing about his secret addiction or the amount of money he owed, and now there would soon be another mouth to feed. He needed to take any work offered to help pay it off. This particular construction job had come without warning, and he had had little time to figure out a sitter. Luckily, he'd found a woman named Ning through an online posting. She said she could look after Josh, and she could also stop by to do the chores. Despite not knowing a thing about her, she reminded him of his grandmother, and he was desperate. She'd appeared at the perfect time. The first day Gabriel was away, Ning picked Josh up from school and made dinner. In the evening, Josh rubbed oil on his mother's feet and helped her to bed, like his dad had instructed him. After tucking her in, he looked back to make sure she was safe and comfortable. He smiled, and he went into his own room to get some rest. Around midnight, Josh was awakened by strange noises coming from his mother's room. He leapt up from his bed to rush to her aid. He swung the door open and was greeted by a terrifying vision. Peering down at his mother from the ceiling was a horrific-looking creature. Its lower torso seemed to be missing, entrails flapping from where the stomach ended. Sure enough, with a quick dart of his eyes, Josh confirmed the lower half of the body stood in the corner of the room, macabrely awaiting reattachment. Huge leathery bat wings kept it afloat, and an enormous elongated tongue protruded from its maw. When it looked at Josh, he had a glimmer of recognition. This thing was Ning, the mysterious sitter. "Mom!" She heard him and begged for help, and he knew he had to do something before the monster destroyed his mother and unborn sibling. She was weeping and praying for her baby, but seemed unable to move. "She's a manananggal. Josh, you must kill her and save your sibling." Josh felt the room sway as he fought to stay conscious, terror washing over him. Manananggal is a creature that during daylight looks like a normal human, but when on the hunt, separates from its lower body and grows wings. This allows it to fly and maneuver easily towards its prey. The 4-feet-long proboscis-like tongue was designed with one sole purpose: to suck the blood of pregnant mothers and to suck up the fetus. Despite his fear, he grabbed his father's baseball bat and began swinging at the beast's wings. It hissed at Josh with vampire-like fangs. He went in to hit it again, but this time it used its massive wing to knock him against the wall, the bat flying under the bed. Josh desperately searched for another weapon, but the monster was back over, tongue extended. She tried to cover her belly, but the creature used its human arms to pin her down. Josh panicked, sensing only one choice left. "Take me instead," he cried out, his voice cracking. "Leave my mom. You can have me, all my blood." "No," sobbed his mom, but the manananggal was interested. It swung its wing at her face, knocking her out, then swooped over to Josh. Despite his terror, he felt noble, knowing his father would have been proud that he'd sacrificed himself for his mama and the baby. The creature grabbed Joshua by the neck and bit, sinking in its fangs. Blood spilled all over them, splattering the walls, and then threw his body with such force, he smashed through the window, landing outside. Poor Josh was dead before he hit the ground. The manananggal lapped up the residual blood, but was unsatisfied. It extended out its proboscis. Air whistled eagerly into the elongated tubular tongue as the monster headed back to the unconscious mom. As blood soaked the sheets, it took mere moments to suck the fetus out of the navel and swallow it whole, leaving the mother to bleed to death alone. The following morning, just a day after his departure, Gabriel entered his family's home. He walked about the living room, shouting for everyone. He had made a decision he was excited to share. He had postponed the job for now. Despite the pressure to pay the debts, it hadn't felt right to be away. He'd just have to continue hiding his gambling for now and somehow work extra hard once the baby was born. As he put his things down and wondered why no one was answering, he made his way to his wife's bedroom. As he fell to his knees in horror, gasping for air, Ning entered with a basket of laundry. She screamed and dropped it, running to console Gabriel, appearing as shocked as he was at the devastation. The massacre she, the manananggal, had caused. For years after Ning stayed, practically attached to Gabriel's side, a faithful housekeeper, a doting friend of the family, including when he remarried. And when the happy couple announced they were expecting twins, well, you can imagine Ning's delight.
Thanks so much for listening. Like and share if this video gave you the chills. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for notifications. See you next time.